Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to break down a really important Supreme Court ruling that solves a major puzzle in workplace harassment cases. What happens when the person harassing you doesn't even work for your company? This decision finally gives us a clear answer. Let's dive right in.
So let's just imagine a scenario for a second. You're at your job, doing your thing, and someone from a totally different organization harasses you. You want to file a complaint under the POSH Act. That's the law for preventing sexual harassment at the workplace. But where do you go? Do you file with your company's internal complaints committee, or do you have to go to their company? Until this case, that was a real legal gray area. Nobody was quite sure.
And this exact question was right at the heart of a case that made it all the way to the Supreme Court. It involved two very senior civil servants, Dr. Sohail Malik, who was an Indian Revenue Service officer, and a senior IAS officer, who was the woman who filed the complaint.
Okay, so here's how it all went down. Things happened pretty fast. On May 15, 2023, the alleged harassment happened. Literally the next day, an FIR, a First Information Report, was filed. That's basically the first official step in a police investigation. Then, about a week later, the woman also took action under the POSH Act and filed a complaint with her own department's Internal Complaints Committee. So here's where things get complicated. Dr. Malik, who's from the Central Board of Direct Taxes, made a big argument. He said, wait a minute, only my department's committee can investigate me. But the complainant from the Department of Food and Public Distribution had already started the process with her committee. So he challenged their authority, and that's the legal fight that brought this whole issue into the spotlight.
And that brings us to the big legal puzzle, right? Did the complainant's own internal complaints committee even have the legal power, the jurisdiction, to investigate an employee from a completely different department? This was the absolute core question that the Supreme Court had to answer.
The entire case, and I mean the whole thing, really hinged on how you read this one little phrase from Section 11 of the POSH Act, where the respondent is an employee. Dr. Malik's argument was that the word where meant a physical place, a location. So the investigation had to happen at his workplace.
So to figure this out, the Supreme Court didn't just look at the dictionary definition of the words. They did something much deeper. They looked at the text, for sure, but they also asked a more fundamental question. What was the whole point of the POSH Act in the first place? What was it trying to achieve?
This slide really breaks down the court's logic. On one hand, you have the appellant's argument. Where means a place, but the Supreme Court saw it completely differently. They said no. In this legal context, where functions like the word if. It's setting up a condition, a situation. It means if the respondent is an employee, then you follow a certain procedure. It's a procedural trigger, not a geographical one.
And this is absolutely crucial. The court reminded everyone that the POSH Act isn't just some administrative rulebook. It's what's called social welfare legislation. Its entire job is to protect people, specifically women in this case, and to make sure their constitutional rights to equality and a safe place to work are upheld. That means you have to interpret it in a way that actually helps achieve that goal.
And this quote from the judgment just says it all, really. The court pointed out that if you forced a woman to go to her harasser's workplace to file a complaint, you'd be creating massive hurdles for her. Think about it. That would be incredibly intimidating and would totally defeat the purpose of having a protective law in the first place.
All right, so the Supreme Court settled it. The victim's workplace does have jurisdiction. But then, how does that actually work in practice when two different organizations are involved? Well, they didn't just stop there. They laid out a super clear, practical framework for how these investigations should be handled.
They broke it down into this simple two-stage process. Step 1 is the fact-finding. The woman's own internal committee conducts the initial investigation. Their job is to figure out the facts and determine if there's merit to the complaint. Then, for Step 2, that report gets sent over to the harasser's employer. At that point, if disciplinary action is needed, their employer's own committee can take over and handle the formal proceedings according to their own rules.
And this is the genius of it, really. It's so simple and effective. The court brilliantly separated the power to investigate from the power to punish. The victim's team gets to investigate the facts in a safe environment for her, and the accused's employer retains the authority to handle any disciplinary action. It makes the process fair and, most importantly, accessible for the person who needs protection.
So what's the bottom line here? What's the final verdict, and what does this all mean for workplace safety in India moving forward?
It all comes down to this one powerful idea. The safety mechanism follows the victim, not the accused. The protection offered by the POSH Act is tied to the victim and her workplace. That safety net goes where she is. It isn't limited by where her harasser happens to work.
It's a truly victim-centric approach.
So let's just quickly recap the big takeaways. First off, the aggrieved woman's internal committee has the power to investigate, even if the respondent is from another company. Second, the POSH Act has to be interpreted broadly to help victims, not create more barriers. This ruling also closes a huge loophole for any kind of third-party harassment. We now have a clear two-stage process. And finally, and this is a big one, every single employer has a legal duty to cooperate with these investigations.
This ruling is a massive step in the right direction for safer and more accountable workplaces. But it also leaves us with a really important question to think about for the future. In a world where our work lives are more and more connected, how do we make sure our laws keep up and always prioritize real justice over getting stuck on procedural roadblocks? Something to think about. That's it for this explainer. Thanks so much for joining us.